The wagon train lurched to a halt outside Eureka Springs, Arkansas, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, and among the weary travelers stepping down onto the dusty Main Street was a young woman nobody wanted to claim as their own. Nora Mullins had traveled 2,000 miles wedged between crates and barrels, sleeping under stars that offered no comfort, eating scraps that families grudgingly shared when they remembered her existence. She was 20 years old, slender as a willow branch, with dark hair that hung in a thick braid down her back and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her dress was patched and faded, her shoes worn through at the soles, and her possessions fit into a single carpet bag that had seen better days decades ago. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Henderson, gathered the travelers in front of the general store. He read names from a crumpled list, matching people with family members who had sent for them or with employers who had promised work. One by one, the weary pioneers found their places. Nora stood to the side, clutching her bag, knowing her name would not be called. Her aunt and uncle had arranged her passage west with promises of taking her in, giving her a fresh start after her parents died of fever back in St. Louis. But when the wagon train stopped in Kansas City for supplies, a letter had been waiting. Her uncle had been killed in a mining accident. Her aunt, left with 4 children and no income, had taken up with a new man who would not tolerate another mouth to feed. The letter had been brief and final. Nora was on her own. She had continued west because there was nowhere else to go, surviving on the charity of strangers who barely tolerated her presence. Now, standing in this strange town with afternoon sun beating down on her shoulders, she felt the weight of her complete aloneness settle over her like a heavy blanket. The crowd dispersed. Families reunited with tears and laughter. Men headed toward the saloon. Women bustled toward the boarding house. Nora remained standing in the street, uncertain which direction to take. "You lost, girl," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. A woman in a severe black dress approached, her mouth pinched into a permanent frown. "This is a respectable town. We do not allow vagrants." "I am not a vagrant, madam. I just arrived with the wagon train. And where is your family, your husband?" "I have neither." Nora lifted her chin, trying to maintain dignity despite the trembling in her hands. "But I can work. I am strong and willing." The woman looked her up and down with obvious disapproval. "The boarding house is full. Mrs. Peterson might need help at the restaurant, but she cannot pay much and certainly cannot provide lodging. You might try the church, though Reverend Williams has little patience for charity cases." Before Nora could respond, a commotion erupted from the far end of the street. Horses whinnied and people scattered as a massive man on an equally massive roan stallion came riding through town. The rider sat tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair falling past his collar and a thick beard covering a strong jaw. His arms were roped with muscle visible even beneath his worn shirt, and his hands on the reins were calloused and scarred from hard living. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never needed anyone's approval. "That is Cade Fletcher," the woman in black said with a sniff of disdain. "Mountain man, trapper, lives up in the hills like a savage, comes to town once a month for supplies and causes nothing but trouble. Best stay clear of him." Nora watched as Cade Fletcher dismounted in front of the general store with fluid grace despite his size. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill doorways. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. Several men called out greetings, which he returned with brief nods. Women whispered behind their hands and pulled their children closer. The woman in black departed with a final warning about finding respectable work, leaving Nora alone once more. She looked around the unfamiliar town, trying to decide her next move. The restaurant seemed the most logical choice, though working for little pay with nowhere to sleep presented obvious problems. She started walking toward what appeared to be an eating establishment when her worn shoe caught on a rut in the road. She stumbled, catching herself before falling, but her carpetbag slipped from her grip and tumbled open, spilling her meager belongings into the dust. Nora dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her things. A spare dress, carefully folded, a few undergarments, a book of poetry her mother had given her, a small wooden box containing her parents' wedding rings and a single daguerreotype of them on their wedding day. Tears burned her eyes as she clutched these pathetic remnants of a life that had been stolen from her. "Need help?" The voice was deep, rough from disuse, but not unkind. Nora looked up to find Cade Fletcher standing over her, blocking the sun. Up close, he was even more imposing. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, clear as mountain lakes, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I can manage, thank you." She reached for her dress, but he was already picking it up, folding it with surprising care despite his large hands. "Carpetbag is torn at the seam," he observed, examining the bag. "Won't hold much longer. It is all I have." The words came out sharper than she intended, embarrassment making her defensive. Cade handed her the folded dress, then gathered the rest of her belongings while she clutched the wooden box to her chest. He rose to his feet and extended a hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm and rough against hers, his grip gentle despite obvious strength. "You came on the wagon train," he said. "It was not a question. Yes. Waiting for someone? No." Nora brushed dust from her skirt, avoiding his gaze. "I am waiting for no one." Cade was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not read. His jaw was set, his eyes thoughtful. "Name is Cade Fletcher. Nora Mullins." "Well, Miss Mullins, you look like you could use a meal." "Restaurant down the street serves decent stew." "I cannot afford," did not ask if you could afford it, asked if you were hungry. The kindness in his offer, unexpected and undeserved, nearly undid her completely. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "That is very generous, but I cannot accept charity from a stranger." "Not charity, company. I hate eating alone." He gestured toward the restaurant. "Besides, you can tell me why a young woman with no family and a torn carpetbag ends up in Eureka Springs with nowhere to go." Nora knew she should refuse. Every instinct warned her against accepting help from this rough mountain man who lived outside society's rules. But hunger gnawed at her stomach, and the genuine concern in his blue eyes made something in her chest ache with longing for human kindness. "One meal," she agreed. "Then I will find work and repay you, if that makes you feel better about it." Cade picked up her carpetbag and started toward the restaurant, clearly expecting her to follow. The restaurant was a simple establishment with wooden tables and benches, but it smelled wonderfully of bread and cooking meat. Several patrons looked up as they entered, their eyes widening at the sight of Cade Fletcher escorting a young woman. Whispers started immediately. Cade ignored them, leading Nora to a table in the corner. He set her carpetbag carefully beside her, then settled onto the bench across from her. The furniture seemed small beneath his large frame. A woman in her 50s approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Cade Fletcher, as I live and breathe. Did not expect to see you for another week. Needed supplies early, Mrs. Peterson. 2 bowls of stew and fresh bread if you have it." Mrs. Peterson's gaze shifted to Nora, curiosity evident in her expression. "And who might this be, Miss Nora Mullins?" "Just arrived on the wagon train. Pleased to meet you, dear." Mrs. Peterson's eyes were kind, though questions clearly burned behind them. I will get that food right out. After she left, Cade leaned back against the wall, studying Nora with that same intense focus. So tell me how a woman ends up alone in a strange town with no prospects. Nora hesitated, then found herself telling the story. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the way Cade listened without judgment, his blue eyes never leaving her face. She told him about her parents' deaths, her aunt and uncle's broken promises, the long journey west surrounded by people who saw her as a burden. When she finished, her throat was tight with emotion. "That is a hard road," Cade said quietly. "I will manage, I always have." "What kind of work can you do?" "I can cook, clean, sew, tend gardens. I helped my mother run our household in St. Louis. I am educated. I can read and write and do figures. Any of those skills likely to get you lodging in this town." Nora's shoulders sagged. "Mrs. Peterson might need help here, but she cannot provide a place to stay. The boarding house is full. I suppose I could ask at the church. Reverend Williams will put you to work scrubbing floors and tell you it builds character." Cade's tone suggested he had little respect for the Reverend. "And he will make sure everyone knows you are dependent on his charity." "Then what would you suggest?" Frustration crept into her voice. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. I am doing the best I can." Mrs. Peterson arrived with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of bread. The food smelled like heaven. Nora's stomach growled audibly. "Eat," Cade said, pushing a bowl toward her. Nora wanted to maintain pride, to eat slowly and delicately, but hunger won. She tore into the bread and stew like a starving animal, barely tasting it in her desperation to fill the emptiness inside her. When she finally looked up embarrassed, Cade was eating his own meal, seemingly unconcerned by her lack of manners. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked. "Kansas City, 3 weeks ago." His jaw tightened. "Those people on the wagon train watched you starve. They had their own families to feed. I was not their responsibility. Human decency should be everyone's responsibility." Cade pushed the bread basket toward her. "Eat more." Nora took another piece, eating more slowly this time. The food settled warmly in her stomach, and for the first time in weeks, she felt almost human again. "I have a proposition," Cade said, setting down his spoon. Nora's guard went up immediately. She had heard about propositions from men before, always couched in promises and ending in ruin. "I am not that kind of woman. Did not think you were." His expression remained serious. "I live up in the mountains about 10 miles from town. Built a cabin on good land with a stream running through it. I trap, hunt, trade furs. It is a hard life but honest. Cabin is solid, keeps out weather. I come to town once a month for supplies I cannot make or grow myself. What does this have to do with me? Place is isolated, lonely. Could use someone to help with tasks I am not good at. Cooking that is more than meat over a fire. Mending. Keeping the cabin livable instead of just survivable. In exchange, you would have a roof over your head, food, protection, and a small wage." Nora stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering. "You want a housekeeper, more like a partner, someone to share the work and the life." Cade met her eyes steadily. "I know how it sounds, mountain man asking a woman with no options to come live in an isolated cabin. But I give you my word, I would not dishonor you. You would have your own space, your privacy. If you wanted to leave at any time, I would bring you back to town, no questions asked. Why would you make such an offer to a complete stranger? Because I know what it feels like to have no one." His voice was rough with old pain. "My parents died when I was 15. Spent years drifting, taking work where I could find it, sleeping rough. Ended up in these mountains 5 years ago and realized I could make a life here. But it is a half-life alone, and you need help. Seems like we might be able to help each other." Nora wanted to refuse. Every proper instinct told her this was madness. A young, unmarried woman living alone with a man in the wilderness was scandalous, dangerous, completely unacceptable by society's standards. But society had abandoned her long before she arrived in Eureka Springs. The people who judged her offered no alternatives, only condemnation. "The town would consider me ruined," she said quietly. "The town can think what it wants. I live by my own rules, not theirs." "You said I would have my own space. Cabin has 2 rooms. You would have one to yourself. I would build you a proper door with a lock if that would make you feel safer." The offer was too generous, too convenient. Nora searched his face for ulterior motives but found only honest openness. He was not pushing, not manipulating, simply offering an option. "I need to think about this." "Fair enough." Cade finished his stew and signaled Mrs. Peterson for more bread. "Take the afternoon. Look for other opportunities if you want. I will be at the general store until sundown getting supplies. If you decide to accept, meet me there before I leave. If not, I wish you well." They finished the meal in silence. Cade paid Mrs. Peterson, who looked between them with obvious curiosity but asked no questions. Outside, he handed Nora her carpet bag. "Think carefully," he said. "It is not an easy life I am offering. Winter gets hard up there. You would be far from other people, but you would be safe, fed, and have a purpose." "Why do I feel like you are the one taking the bigger risk?" Nora asked. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen. It transformed his rugged face, making him seem younger and less intimidating. "Maybe we are both taking a risk. Sometimes that is all we can do." He touched the brim of his hat and walked toward the general store, leaving Nora standing in the afternoon sun with a decision that would change her life. She spent the next few hours exploring her limited options. Mrs. Peterson was kind but honest. She could offer work 3 days a week for minimal pay, not enough to afford lodging anywhere. The boarding house was indeed full, with a waiting list. The church was locked, and neighbors informed her Reverend Williams was visiting a sick parishioner and would not return until tomorrow. Nora sat on the steps of the general store, watching the town go about its business. Women in clean dresses walked arm in arm, laughing. Children played in the street. Men conducted business, shook hands, made deals. Everyone belonged somewhere, connected to the community by threads of family and friendship and commerce. She belonged nowhere. She was a ghost, invisible and unclaimed. Through the window of the general store, she could see Cade Fletcher moving between shelves, selecting supplies with careful consideration. He worked methodically, checking items against a list, asking questions of the shopkeeper. There was nothing threatening about him, nothing that suggested danger. He simply seemed like a man living his life on his own terms. The sun was touching the horizon when Nora picked up her carpetbag and walked into the store. Cade looked up from a display of traps, his blue eyes meeting hers. He did not speak, did not push, simply waited. "I accept your offer," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt, "with one condition. Name it. If either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we agree to end it honestly, without recrimination. I will not be trapped in a situation that becomes unbearable." "Agreed." Cade extended his hand. "We have a deal, Miss Mullins." Nora shook his hand, sealing her fate. The shopkeeper watched with wide eyes, clearly dying to spread gossip. Cade ignored him, returning to his purchases. "Will take me another hour to finish here and load the wagon," he said. "You hungry again? I could eat." "Go get something from Mrs. Peterson. Tell her to put it on my account. Meet me back here when you are ready." Nora wanted to protest accepting more charity, but practicality won. She returned to the restaurant, where Mrs. Peterson fed her a plate of chicken and vegetables while asking careful questions about her plans. "Cade Fletcher is a good man," the older woman said finally. "Rough around the edges, lives like a hermit but honest. He helped my husband when bandits tried to rob the restaurant last year. Did not ask for thanks or reward, just did what needed doing and left. The town seems wary of him. People fear what they do not understand. Cade does not fit their neat little boxes, so they call him savage and dangerous. But I have seen him trade furs fairly, help folks in trouble, and keep his word. You could do worse for a protector." The word protector settled over Nora like a warm cloak. She had been protecting herself for so long, fighting every day just to survive. The idea of someone else shouldering that burden, even partially, was almost too wonderful to believe. She returned to the general store to find Cade loading the last supplies into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. The roan stallion was tied to the back. He took her carpet bag and secured it among the supplies, then helped her onto the wagon seat. As they pulled out of town, Nora looked back at Eureka Springs. A few people watched them leave, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. The woman in black stood outside the church, shaking her head in obvious condemnation. "Having second thoughts?" Cade asked, noticing her looking back. "Just wondering if I am making a terrible mistake. Probably are, but at least it is your mistake to make." The honesty of that statement made Nora laugh, a sound that surprised her. When had she last laughed? They rode in companionable silence as the sun set and stars emerged. The road climbed steadily into hills covered with pine and oak. The air grew cooler, scented with evergreen and earth. Night sounds filled the darkness. Owls hooting, small animals rustling in undergrowth, the steady clip-clop of horse hooves on the packed dirt road. "Tell me about your cabin," Nora said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. "Built it myself 3 years ago. 1 large room for living and cooking, 1 smaller room I use for storage and working on furs. I will clear it out for you, build a proper bed frame. There is a loft above where I sleep. Stream runs about 50 yards from the door, good clean water. Small barn for the horses and storage. Garden plot that needs better tending than I give it. You see other people often. Not unless I want to. Nearest neighbor is about 5 miles east, family named the Harpers. Good folks. 3 children. Mrs. Harper will likely come visiting once she hears there is another woman nearby. Indians pass through sometimes, mostly Cherokee. We trade and leave each other in peace. Is it dangerous? Life is dangerous. But I can handle trouble. Keep a rifle, know how to use it. Animals mostly leave humans alone if you are smart about food storage and making noise. Worst danger is probably the isolation. Some people cannot take the quiet. Nora considered this. I think I would welcome quiet after weeks of being surrounded by people who did not want me there. Then you might do just fine. They rode for nearly 2 hours before Cade turned the wagon onto a narrow track barely visible in the moonlight. Trees pressed close on both sides, and Nora heard the rush of water somewhere ahead. Then the track opened into a clearing, and in the pale moonlight, she saw her new home. The cabin was larger than she expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A covered porch ran along the front. Windows with shutters flanked a sturdy door. The barn sat to one side, and she could hear the stream Cade had mentioned. "It is beautiful," she said, surprised by the truth of it. "It is home." Cade set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help her from the wagon. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her down. For a moment they stood close in the moonlight, his hands warm through her thin dress. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you inside. The interior was sparse but clean. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a counter for food preparation. Hooks on the wall held tools and clothing. The second room was indeed full of furs and traps, but Cade immediately began moving things out. "Give me an hour and I will have this cleared," he said. "You can rest by the fire." But Nora found herself helping, carrying armfuls of furs to the barn, organizing traps, sweeping away dust and debris. Working together, they transformed the storage room into a bedroom. Cade brought in a rope frame bed from the barn, muttering that he had meant to repair it but never got around to it. He laid fresh pine boughs across the ropes, then covered them with thick furs to make a surprisingly comfortable mattress. "I will make you a proper door tomorrow," he promised. "For tonight I will sleep outside if that would make you more comfortable." "That is not necessary. You said I could trust you. I choose to believe that." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Thank you." He brought in her carpet bag, then stepped back. "There is a basin and water on the counter if you want to wash. I will stable the horses and bring in supplies. Make yourself at home." Nora watched him leave, then closed the makeshift curtain he had hung across her doorway. She sank onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the day crash over her. This morning, she had been homeless and hopeless. Tonight, she had a room, a bed, and a strange sense of possibility. She washed her face and hands, changed into her nightgown, and crawled beneath the furs. Through the thin walls, she heard Cade moving around outside, taking care of tasks with quiet efficiency. Eventually, she heard him enter the cabin, bank the fire, and climb to the loft above. "Sleep well, Miss Mullins," he called down softly. "You too, Mr. Fletcher." Nora closed her eyes, expecting anxiety to keep her awake. Instead, lulled by the sound of the stream and the safety of solid walls, she fell into the deepest sleep she had known in months. She woke to sunlight streaming through a window she had not noticed in the darkness, and the smell of coffee brewing. Disoriented, she sat up, taking a moment to remember where she was. The events of yesterday seemed like a dream, but the rough log walls and fur bedding confirmed reality. Nora dressed quickly, braided her hair, and emerged from her room to find Cade at the fireplace, frying bacon in a large skillet. He looked up at her entrance, and she noticed his hair was damp, his face freshly shaved. "Morning. Coffee is ready. Breakfast will be done in a minute." "You should have woken me. I can cook." "Figured you needed rest more than I needed help with bacon." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." Nora sipped the coffee, strong and hot. "This cabin is wonderful. I cannot believe you built it yourself. Took the better part of a summer, but I wanted it done right." Cade plated bacon and cornbread, then joined her at the table. "I thought I would spend today building your door and making some furniture. You could get settled, look around, see what needs doing." They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. Afterward, Nora insisted on washing dishes while Cade gathered tools. She explored the cabin properly, taking inventory of supplies and making mental lists of improvements. The place was clean enough but clearly lacking a woman's touch. Shelves were haphazardly organized, clothing needed mending, and the whole space could benefit from some order. Outside, she found Cade measuring wood for her door. He had stripped down to his undershirt against the growing heat, and Nora found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he worked. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew his own strength, handling heavy planks like they weighed nothing. "Is there a garden I could work on?" she asked, pulling her attention back to practical matters. Cade pointed to a plot on the sunny side of the cabin. "Tried to grow vegetables there last year. got some potatoes and squash, but most of it died from neglect. You are welcome to do what you want with it. Nora spent the morning pulling weeds and turning soil, pleased to find the earth rich and dark. A few hardy plants had survived Cade's neglect: wild onions, some herbs, a struggling tomato plant. With proper care, this could produce substantial food. Cade worked steadily on the door, the sound of sawing and hammering providing a pleasant rhythm to the day. Around midday, he called her over to show his progress. The door was beautifully made, with smooth planks fitted tightly together and sturdy hinges. "I will install it this afternoon," he said. "And I made you this." He held up a simple but functional lock and key. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the respect for her privacy and safety brought tears to Nora's eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "You have been so kind to me." "You have nowhere to go and needed help. That is not kindness. That is basic human decency." Cade set the door aside and wiped sweat from his forehead. "I am going to check the traps along the creek. Should be back in a couple hours. If you need anything, ring the bell by the door. I will hear it." After he left, Nora went inside and examined the food supplies. She found flour, salt, dried beans, bacon, cornmeal, and some spices. Not much to work with, but more than enough for a proper meal. She set beans to soak, then mixed dough for biscuits. Cooking felt good. For the first time in weeks, she had a purpose beyond simple survival. She cleaned as she worked, organizing shelves, folding clothes, sweeping floors. The cabin began to feel less like a bachelor's rough shelter and more like a home. Cade returned in the late afternoon with 3 rabbits and several fish. He cleaned them outside, then brought her the dressed meat. "Thought we could have fresh rabbit for supper," he said. "Perfect. I made biscuits and beans." He paused, looking around the transformed cabin. Everything was neat, organized, and there was a pot simmering over the fire that smelled wonderfully of cooking beans. His expression was difficult to read. "You did not have to do all this," he said quietly. "You gave me a home. The least I can do is make it comfortable. Still, you just got here, should be resting." "I have rested enough. I need to be useful." Nora took the rabbits from him. "Go install that door before it gets dark." A smile crossed his face, quick and genuine. "Yes, madam." They worked through the evening, Cade installing the door and building a small wardrobe for her room while Nora cooked supper. When they finally sat down to eat, the meal was the best either of them had tasted in a long time. Fresh rabbit stew with vegetables, fluffy biscuits, and the last of the coffee. "You are a fine cook," Cade said, sopping up gravy with a biscuit. "My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to make a home." "What else did she teach you?" Nora talked about her mother while they ate, sharing memories she had kept locked away. Her mother's love of poetry, her beautiful singing voice, her determination that Nora receive an education despite their limited means. Cade listened with genuine interest, asking questions, encouraging her to keep talking. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," he said when Nora finished. "She was. I wish she had lived to see me make something of myself." "Maybe she does see. And maybe she would be proud of you for surviving, for being strong enough to keep going when everything went wrong." The words settled over Nora like a blessing. She blinked back tears, overwhelmed by this rough mountain man's unexpected gentleness. That night, she slept behind her new door with its lock, feeling safer than she had since her parents died. Outside, the wilderness sang its night songs, but inside the cabin she was protected and warm. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Cade would rise before dawn to check traps, hunt, or work on projects around the property. Nora would cook, clean, tend the garden, and handle the domestic tasks that made their rough life more comfortable. They ate meals together, talking easily about everything and nothing. In the evenings, Cade would work on furs or repair equipment, while Nora mended clothes or read aloud from her book of poetry. 3 weeks passed before Nora realized how completely her life had changed. She was healthy again, properly fed and rested. Her dresses fit better, no longer hanging on a skeletal frame. Her hands grew calloused from garden work and hauling water, but they were productive calluses, earned through meaningful labor. More surprisingly, she was happy. The isolation she had feared became a blessing. No one judged her here. No one whispered about her reputation or called her a burden. She and Cade existed in their own world, bound by mutual respect and growing friendship. Cade proved to be easy to live with. He was tidy, considerate, and never pushed boundaries. True to his word, he treated her with complete respect. Yet Nora found herself increasingly aware of him. The way his muscles moved when he chopped wood, the sound of his laughter when she said something amusing, the gentleness in his rough hands when he brought her wildflowers he found while checking traps. She was falling in love with him, she realized one morning while watching him work with the horses. The knowledge terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She had no experience with such feelings, no way to know if he might return them. He was kind to her, certainly, but that might simply be his nature. The situation clarified itself one afternoon when Mrs. Harper arrived for a visit. Nora was working in the garden when she heard a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a woman in her 30s driving a small cart with 3 children bouncing in the back. "Hello," the woman called cheerfully. "You must be Miss Mullins. I am Sarah Harper, your nearest neighbor. These are my children, Emma, Daniel, and little Thomas." Nora brushed dirt from her hands and approached, genuinely pleased to see another woman. "Please call me Nora. Would you like some tea or water? I have fresh biscuits. Tea would be wonderful." Sarah climbed down from the cart, directing her children to play nicely. "I would have come sooner, but we were visiting my sister in Missouri. Just got back yesterday and heard from Mrs. Peterson that you were living up here with Cade." They settled on the porch with tea and biscuits while the children explored under strict instructions not to wander far. Sarah was warm and friendly, full of questions but not judgmental. "Town is full of gossip about you two," she said frankly, saying all sorts of scandalous things. "I told them Cade Fletcher is the most honorable man I know and they should mind their own business. Thank you for defending us." Nora poured more tea. "I know the arrangement looks improper, but Cade has been nothing but respectful. He gave me a home when I had nothing." "Anyone with eyes can see he is smitten with you," Sarah said with a knowing smile. Nora nearly choked on her tea. "What? Oh, please. My husband went into town last week and saw Cade at the general store. Said he spent 20 minutes picking out fabric, asking Mrs. Peterson what colors young women like. Cade Fletcher, who usually grabs supplies and leaves, agonizing over fabric. That man is courting you even if he has not worked up the courage to say so. I think you are mistaken. He is just being kind. Nora, I have known Cade for 2 years. He is polite, helpful, but he keeps everyone at a distance. He certainly has never brought a woman to live with him. And the way my husband described him asking about fabric, all nervous and uncertain, that is not kindness. That is a man trying to court a woman and having no idea how." The conversation left Nora's mind spinning. Could Sarah be right? She replayed recent interactions with Cade, looking for signs she might have missed. The wildflowers, the care he took building her furniture, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was something precious and fragile. When Cade returned that evening, he was carrying a package from town. He set it on the table, looking almost embarrassed. "Went into Eureka Springs for a few things," he said. "Thought you might need this." Nora opened the package to find several yards of beautiful fabric in deep blue and soft green, along with thread, needles, and even some lace trim. "Cade, this is too much. Your dresses are wearing thin. Figured you could make something new." He rubbed the back of his neck, not meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Peterson said those were good colors. If you do not like them, I can exchange them. They are perfect." Nora ran her fingers over the soft fabric, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." That night after supper, Nora found the courage to broach the subject that had been consuming her thoughts. "Sarah Harper visited today," she said, clearing dishes from the table. "She is good people. I am glad you have a friend nearby. She said something interesting about us." Cade looked up from the trap he was repairing. "What did she say?" "That the town is full of gossip, that my living here with you is considered scandalous." His jaw tightened. "Does that bother you? Because I can take you back to town if your reputation is suffering." "No." Nora set down the dishes and turned to face him. "That is not what bothers me. What bothers me is not knowing what this is, what we are." Cade set aside the trap, giving her his full attention. "What do you want us to be?" "I do not know. I am so confused." Nora twisted her hands together, struggling for words. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You have been so good to me, so kind. But I do not know if that is just your nature or if it means something more." Cade stood, crossing the room until he stood before her. Up close, he was overwhelming, so tall and broad, radiating warmth and strength. But his eyes were gentle as they searched her face. "Nora, when I saw you in town that first day, something in my chest just knew you were meant to be here with me. I have been alone so long, I forgot what it was like to want someone else's company, to look forward to coming home because someone was waiting, to care about someone else's happiness more than my own. You should have said something. How could I? You came here with nothing, desperate and alone. What kind of man would use that situation to push unwanted attention on you? I wanted you to feel safe, to have time to heal. I thought if I was patient, if I showed you I could be trusted, maybe eventually you might come to care for me." Nora's heart was racing. "And if I told you I already do care for you, that I have been falling in love with you and did not know how to say it?" Cade's expression transformed, hope and joy washing over his rugged features. "I would ask permission to court you properly, to show you that my intentions are honorable and true." "Permission granted." Nora reached up and touched his bearded jaw, feeling the rough texture against her palm. "Though I think we have been courting all along without realizing it. Then I guess I am doing it wrong." Cade covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. "A proper courtship should involve flowers and pretty words and me being too nervous to speak. You brought me flowers from the forest. You built me a home. You have given me more than any amount of pretty words could express." Nora stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I do not need proper courtship. I just need to know you want me as much as I want you. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything." Cade's voice was rough with emotion. "But I will not rush you. We can take this as slow as you need." "What if I do not want to go slow?" Cade's breath caught. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Nora Mullins, there is no going back for me. You will own my heart completely. Then we will own each other's hearts." Nora rose on her toes, bringing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and sweet. Then Cade's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made her knees weak. He kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you," he said, "if you will have me." "That might be the worst proposal in history," Nora laughed, giddy with happiness. "But yes, yes, I will marry you." They stood there in the firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, and Nora felt the broken pieces of her life finally coming together into something beautiful. The next month passed in a blur of happiness. Cade courted Nora with the intensity he brought to everything else, showering her with small kindnesses and constant affection. He was respectful of boundaries, always careful not to compromise her virtue, but his love was evident in everything he did. He built her a rocking chair for the porch. He brought her books from town, having asked Mrs. Peterson what an educated woman might enjoy. He taught her to fish and ride horses, patient with her inexperience. In turn, Nora made the cabin a true home, cooking elaborate meals with ingredients Cade brought from town, sewing curtains for the windows, planting flowers around the porch. Sarah Harper became a regular visitor, delighted by the romance blooming between them. She helped Nora sew a wedding dress from the blue fabric Cade had bought, creating something beautiful despite their limited resources. 6 weeks after their first kiss, on a brilliant September morning, Cade and Nora rode into Eureka Springs to get married. They had debated making the relationship official, but both wanted the legitimacy of marriage, the public declaration of their commitment. The town reacted with predictable shock. The woman in black declared it a scandal. Others whispered about the impropriety of the whole situation. But enough people knew Cade's character to defend them, and Reverend Williams, for all his other faults, believed in the sanctity of marriage and was willing to perform the ceremony. They were married in the small church with Sarah Harper and her husband as witnesses. Nora wore her blue dress with wildflowers in her hair. Cade wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, looking almost civilized except for the wild intensity in his eyes as he watched his bride approach. The ceremony was brief. Cade's voice was steady as he promised to love and honor her. Nora's hands trembled as she made her own vows. When Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Cade kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation sighed. They celebrated with a meal at Mrs. Peterson's restaurant, joined by the Harpers and a few other friendly faces. Cade accepted congratulations with quiet dignity, never leaving Nora's side, his hand constantly at her back or holding hers. As the sun began to set, they rode back to their cabin, their home as husband and wife. The journey that had seemed so long and uncertain when Nora first traveled it now felt familiar and welcoming. When they arrived, Cade helped her down from the wagon, then swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, setting her down gently in the cabin. "Welcome home." "I have been home for months," Nora said, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss. "This is just making it official." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that made Nora understand what true intimacy meant. Cade was gentle with her inexperience, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. When she finally fell asleep in his arms, she was completely, perfectly happy. The winter that followed was harsh, with snow piling high around the cabin and temperatures dropping to dangerous lows. But inside their home, Nora and Cade created their own warmth. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and making plans for the future. Cade taught Nora to shoot a rifle, to identify animal tracks, to survive in the wilderness. Nora taught him to appreciate poetry, to find joy in small domestic pleasures, to open his heart to emotions he had long suppressed. Spring arrived with a rush of wildflowers and new life. Nora planted an ambitious garden while Cade expanded the barn and built a chicken coop. They talked about adding rooms to the cabin, about raising children, about building a life that was rich despite its simplicity. One morning in late April, Nora woke feeling nauseous. The feeling persisted for several days before she realized its significance. She waited another week to be certain, then told Cade over breakfast, "I am with child." Cade dropped his fork, staring at her with an expression of absolute wonder. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I have missed my courses and I feel sick every morning, Mrs. Harper said those were the first signs. Cade was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." He pulled back to look at her and she saw tears in his eyes. "Nora, I have never been happier in my life. A year ago I was alone, thinking I would always be alone. Now I have you and soon we will have a child. How could I be anything but happy?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah Harper visited frequently, bringing advice and supplies, helping Nora prepare for motherhood. Cade became impossibly protective, refusing to let Nora do any heavy work, fussing over her constantly until she had to remind him she was pregnant, not made of glass. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, carving it with intricate designs of forest animals. He traveled to town more frequently, bringing back fabric for baby clothes and supplies Mrs. Peterson recommended. He read everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, determined to be prepared for anything. In late November, on a cold night with snow falling outside, Nora went into labor. Sarah Harper had come to stay with them for the final weeks, and she took charge with calm efficiency while Cade paced like a caged animal, terrified and helpless. The labor was long and difficult. Nora endured hours of pain, clutching Sarah's hand, trying to be brave. Cade sat outside the bedroom door, listening to her cries, feeling utterly useless. Once she called for him, and he was at her side instantly, letting her squeeze his hand until he thought the bones might break. "You are the strongest person I know," he whispered, smoothing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "You can do this." Just before dawn, their son was born. His first cry was strong and healthy, and when Sarah placed the baby in Nora's arms, both parents wept with joy. "He is perfect," Nora breathed, examining tiny fingers and toes. "He looks like you," Cade said, touching the baby's soft cheek with one calloused finger. They named him Christopher Henry Fletcher, honoring both of their fathers. Chris was an easy baby, healthy and content. He had Nora's dark hair and Cade's blue eyes, and he seemed to thrive in the wilderness environment that might have seemed harsh for an infant. Cade was a devoted father, constantly amazed by his son. He would hold Chris for hours, talking to him softly, showing him the world outside their windows. Nora watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Naomi Rose. She was smaller than Chris had been, with Cade's coloring and Nora's delicate features. Where Chris was calm and observant, Naomi was fierce and determined from her first breath. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Cade built additional rooms, creating separate spaces for the children. The barn grew larger, housing more animals. The garden became more productive under Nora's expert care. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they were rich in what mattered. Their children grew up healthy and loved, learning to read from Nora and to survive in the wilderness from Cade. They knew every tree and stream for miles around. They could identify animal tracks and edible plants. They learned to shoot, to fish, to build and repair. But they also learned poetry and mathematics. They heard stories of cities and culture beyond their mountains. Nora made sure they understood there was a wider world, even if they chose to make their lives in this isolated place. Chris grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and gentle nature. Naomi was smaller but fierce, with a sharp mind and quick tongue. They adored each other and fought constantly, the way siblings do. More children followed. Henry, Samuel, and finally another daughter, Rose, born when Nora was 32. Each pregnancy was celebrated, each child welcomed into the warm chaos of their growing family. The mountain cabin that had once housed a lonely man and a desperate young woman became a home full of laughter and life. Cade expanded it repeatedly, until it was more of a small house than a cabin, with multiple bedrooms and a large main room where the family gathered for meals and evening activities. Eureka Springs grew and changed over the years. Some people who had condemned Nora and Cade eventually softened when they saw the strong, loving family they created. Others remained judgmental, but Nora and Cade stopped caring about town opinions long ago. Sarah Harper remained their closest friend. Her children grew up alongside the Fletcher children, playing together whenever the families visited. The friendship between the two women deepened over years of shared experiences: childbirth, child rearing, the challenges of frontier life. Mrs. Peterson aged but remained sharp, always greeting the Fletcher family warmly when they came to town. She loved to spoil the children with cookies and tell them stories about when their parents first met. "Your father was so nervous," she would tell them, "asking about fabric colors, trying so hard to do something nice for your mother. And your mother was this thin, scared young thing who looked like she might break. Look at you all now, strong and healthy and happy." On Nora's 30th birthday, Cade gave her a journal. "Write our story," he said, "so the children will know how we found each other." Nora spent months writing, documenting their journey from that first meeting in Eureka Springs through all the years that followed. She wrote about fear and hope, loneliness and love, struggle and triumph. When she finished, she gave it to Cade to read. He sat by the fire for hours, turning pages, occasionally wiping his eyes. When he finished, he pulled her into his arms. "We made a good life," he said simply. "The best life." The years continued to pass. Chris fell in love with a girl from town and married at 22, building his own cabin on Fletcher land with his father's help. Naomi shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher, traveling to Little Rock for training before returning to start a school in Eureka Springs. Henry and Samuel followed different paths: Henry into ranching, Samuel into carpentry, but both remained close to home, building their own lives while staying connected to family. Rose, the baby, grew into a beautiful young woman who loved the wilderness as much as her father did. She learned to trap and hunt, refusing to be limited by expectations of what women should do. Nora and Cade watched their children grow and thrive with deep satisfaction. They had created something lasting, something good. From nothing, from loneliness and desperation, they had built a legacy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cade took Nora back to Eureka Springs. They stayed at the now expanded boarding house and ate at Mrs. Peterson's restaurant, which her daughter had taken over after she retired. They walked through the town that had witnessed their unlikely beginning, remembering that desperate day when a lonely mountain man had offered kindness to a woman nobody wanted. "You ever regret it?" Cade asked as they stood outside the church where they had married. "Choosing this hard life instead of finding something easier in town?" "Never." Nora took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, purpose, home. What more could I want? You gave me the same. Before you, I was just existing. You taught me how to live." They kissed there in the middle of town, no longer caring what anyone thought. They were Cade and Nora Fletcher, and their love story was written in the mountains they called home and the family they had created together. As they grew older, their roles shifted. The children took over more of the physical work. Grandchildren began to arrive, filling the homestead with new energy. Chris and his wife had 3 children. Naomi remained unmarried but adopted an orphaned girl she found in town, raising her with the same fierce love her own mother had shown. Henry married a Cherokee woman named Mary, bridging two worlds and creating a family that honored both traditions. Samuel married late but happily, to a widow with two children who blended seamlessly into the growing Fletcher clan. Rose married a man she met while trading furs in town, a gentle blacksmith named Thomas who loved her wildness and never tried to tame it. Cade's hair turned silver, his beard went white, but he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. He still checked traps, still hunted, still provided for his family with the same determination he always had. Nora's dark hair silvered too, and lines appeared around her eyes, but she remained beautiful to Cade. Her hands, roughened by years of hard work, were the hands that had built their life together. Her voice, reading to grandchildren by the fire, was the voice that had brought poetry and beauty into his wilderness existence. They grew old together in the cabin that had witnessed their entire life, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. On a spring morning in 1918, when Nora was 60 and Cade 65, they sat together on the porch they had shared for 40 years. The valley below was green with new growth, the stream rushed with snowmelt and wildflowers bloomed in profusion. "Remember when you first brought me here?" Nora asked, holding Cade's hand. "I was so scared. I had no idea what I was agreeing to. Best decision either of us ever made." Cade squeezed her hand gently. "The girl nobody claimed became the woman everybody loved. How did that happen? You were always worthy of love. You just needed someone to see it. And the lonely mountain man became the patriarch of a dynasty." Nora smiled at him. "We did good, did we not?" "We did better than good. We did perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, listening to the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard. Inside the cabin, their daughter Rose was cooking lunch, the smell of fresh bread wafting through open windows. "I would not change a single thing," Nora said softly. "Not the hard times, not the struggles, it all led us here. To this moment, this life, this love." Cade brought her hand to his lips, kissing her weathered knuckles. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a lady. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for claiming me when nobody else would, for loving me through everything." They stayed there on the porch until Rose called them for lunch, surrounded by family, wrapped in love, living the happily ever after they had built together from nothing but hope and determination and faith in each other. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about their love story, they would tell the tale of a woman nobody wanted, and the mountain man who claimed her as his own before the whole town, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. They would speak of a love that survived hardship and isolation, that grew stronger through challenges, that created a family and legacy that would endure for generations. And in the mountains of Arkansas, in a valley where a stream still runs clear and wildflowers bloom each spring, the Fletcher homestead stands as testament to what two people can build when they choose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else. The story of Cade and Nora Fletcher became legend in Eureka Springs, told and retold until it took on mythic qualities. But those who knew them understood the truth was better than any myth. They were simply two people who found each other when they needed it most and chose to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. Their love was not perfect or easy. It was tested by isolation, hardship, loss, and struggle. But it endured because they chose each other every day, through every challenge for the rest of their lives. When Cade passed away peacefully in his sleep at 72, Surrounded by 3 generations of family, Nora grieved deeply but without regret. They had loved each other completely for 47 years. She lived another 5 years, spending her final days telling stories to great-grandchildren, tending her garden, and waiting to reunite with the man who had given her everything. She died in the cabin they had shared, in the bed Cade had built for her when she first arrived, holding the hand of their youngest daughter Rose. Her final words were a whisper, "Tell him I am coming home." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their valley, beneath trees Cade had planted and flowers Nora had tended. The headstone read simply, Cade Fletcher, 1853–1925, and Nora Fletcher, 1858–1930. Beloved parents, grandparents, and partners in all things. But their real legacy was not carved in stone. It lived in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward. It lived in the homestead that remained in the Fletcher family for generations. It lived in the stories told around fires and dinner tables about the mountain man and the girl nobody claimed. It lived in the proof that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that kindness can change lives, that choosing to see another person's worth when nobody else does can create something that lasts forever. And it lived in the mountains themselves, which witnessed their story and held it safe, a testament to 2 people who found each other against all odds and built a love that time could not diminish and death could not end.